The topic of this video is going to be a little bit more complicated than usual because it involves a combination of macroeconomics, which we have no control over, and individual strategies. But at least once a year, we're all treated to the warnings that Social Security is going broke, or sometimes the more dramatic word, bankrupt. In this video, I'm going to challenge that assumption. Tens of millions of people rely on Social Security, and that's why any claim that the program is going broke, or worse, bankrupt, is bound to gather a lot of attention, negative attention. It's like a real-world horror story, especially if you're already collecting Social Security and dependent on the program. But in this video, I'm going to consider the greater likelihood that Social Security is not going broke. I'm not an expert on the subject, but I think there's plenty we can draw from logic and the realities of running government to make our own assumptions about what's coming down. Every year, the Social Security Administration puts out an evaluation on the future of the program. I'm going to read verbatim the summary of the 2025 annual report from the Social Security Administration. This is put out by the Social Security and Medicare Boards of Trustees. Again, I'm going to read this directly from their website. Quote, based on our best estimates, this year's reports show that the Old Age and Survivors Insurance, OASI Trust Fund, will be able to pay 100% of scheduled benefits until 2033, unchanged from last year's report. At that time, the fund's reserves will become depleted, and continuing program income will be sufficient to pay just 77% of total scheduled benefits. So that's the downside here. 23% reduction if something isn't done to shore up the system. And I've got the link to that webpage in the notes below so you can check it yourself. So it's already 2026, meaning that the collapse of the system, or the reduction in benefits, by 2033 puts this just 7 years away. That's definitely close enough for us to be very worried, whether you plan to retire in the next few years or if you're already there. So let's dare to consider why the much promised bankruptcy of Social Security isn't likely to happen. Let's start with this. People speak about the pending bankruptcy of Social Security as though it's a program that exists in a vacuum. It's as if Social Security can go bankrupt, yet leave the rest of the country and the economy untouched. That's a completely false assumption. I'm not trying to be the prophet of doom here, but it's entirely likely that the bankruptcy of Social Security would accompany a broader collapse of the entire U.S. government. After all, Social Security is nothing but one program out of many owned and operated by the U.S. government. If Social Security goes down the drain, so will everything else the government runs and funds. That includes the Department of Defense, interest on the national debt, Medicare, Medicaid, everything you could imagine is going to go with it. At that point, what we're really talking about is not the bankruptcy of Social Security per se, but the end of the United States as we now know it. In other words, we're talking about an economic and political apocalypse. Speaking of which, the collapse of Social Security in itself has the potential to bring about that apocalypse. For example, it would almost certainly lead to widespread social disorder, affecting many millions of people who are not even yet collecting Social Security benefits. That's because Social Security is the bedrock of U.S. government programs, benefiting the largest number of people and holding the most promise for the future. The collapse of the program would result in a complete collapse of public confidence in the government. On a more practical level, Social Security going broke would easily collapse the entire economy. Think about the housing market as just one example. All of a sudden, the majority of current Social Security recipients can no longer afford to keep their homes or even rent an apartment. Millions of homes would go up for sale or be taken over in foreclosure. Since there would be no one to buy those homes, the value of virtually all residential real estate in the country would collapse, along with Social Security, to say nothing of how rents would plummet. The situation would be similar in the financial markets. Absent monthly Social Security checks to pay for day-to-day living expenses, retirees would be forced to liquidate their investments just to survive. That could potentially cause the biggest crash in the stock market since 1929. And that would not only affect the elderly, but also every other American who holds stocks through the financial markets. While all that's playing out, tens of millions of suddenly former retirees, would rapidly be plunged into poverty. Once their homes and their investments have been liquidated, and absent a reliable Social Security benefit, they would have no ability to survive. It wouldn't take a crystal ball to see that this scenario is politically unfeasible. First, the party in power would be voted out of office if they weren't run out of town first. That would lead to a power vacuum resulting in complete chaos at a level we could never imagine. The public would have no trust in our leadership, and no one would be willing to step up and lead anyway. Now, I realize that flies in the face of the reality of the current crop of politicians and all of their predecessors who haven't seemed to grasp the magnitude of the funding problems with Social Security. It's always kick the can down the road for the next administration, the next Congress, whatever. But I think it's safe to assume that the prospect of all of the above playing out will ultimately provide all the motivation politicians will need to take some decisive action to shore up the program. It's not that I have some sort of blind faith in the dedication of politicians, but rather that I do understand the motivator that personal survival can be. And this would be a personal survival situation for politicians as well, because they're going to lose their jobs, they're going to lose their credibility, no more publishing deals, no more going on the lecture circuit and getting paid. And facing the prospect of all the chaos described above would put the political personal survival in severe jeopardy. Even though nothing has been done to close the funding gap on Social Security up to this point, the government has plenty of options. They can raise taxes to pay for the program, make cuts in benefits, or use some combination of both. All of that has been bandied about in recent years, although none of it has been acted on. But given the evidence of recent history, my guess is that the government will do what governments do whenever there's a crisis. They'll print as much money as they need to shore up any funding gaps. They demonstrated exactly that with the multiple stimulus payments and enhanced unemployment benefits distributed during the COVID crisis a few years ago. My money's on that outcome. So we're probably talking about a run of inflation on top of everything. Now, each of these supposed solutions will come with its own set of economic problems, particularly a new round of inflation, should the government choose that route. And again, that's what I think they'll do. Whatever decision is made, Social Security benefits won't suddenly end. My point is, unless you anticipate a total collapse of the United States, there's no point wasting your time and emotional energy worrying about the bankruptcy of Social Security. It won't happen in a vacuum. It can happen in a vacuum, but rather as part of a much bigger and more generalized problem. And if that happens, every one of us is in trouble, regardless of the age or the retirement status of the individual. So I really don't want to go into this because it's really what we're talking about is an apocalypse. I'd rather leave that to the preppers. That's not an area where I'm well versed, but I don't really think that it's going to play out that way. So let's shift gears here for a moment. Let's say your concern about the collapse of Social Security is tied to your fear over the bigger picture collapse involving the entire country. Now, as a fan of history, I'm aware that the collapse of nations can happen and is a possibility even today. The U.S. is facing many structural economic and financial problems that we don't need to discuss here, none of which is being constructively dealt with. For that reason alone, the possibility can't be dismissed out of hand that we will have a total collapse. But that would be much bigger than simply Social Security going broke and leaving retirees out in the cold while everyone seems to be pretty much unaffected. Not likely to happen. No, a collapse of Social Security would take the entire ship of state down with it. I'm not certain there's any way to adequately prepare for a disaster of that magnitude, again, go to the preppers for that. I'm not being a blind optimist and believing that couldn't happen, but rather looking at how the country has survived for the past several decades. Let's face it, this is not a new problem, and it's likely to continue surviving or merely limping along in the foreseeable future for all the same reasons that it has in the recent past. A full-blown apocalyptic, I shouldn't use that word because I can't handle it well, situations make for thrilling speculation, but they rarely play out that way in real life. That's because life and human existence tend to move a lot more slowly than we anticipate. Also, let's consider that for the politicians, the cost of not having Social Security is far greater than the cost of keeping it. That idea alone ensures that Social Security will remain a permanent fixture on the American landscape. A funding shortfall, should it happen, is just a type of crisis that gets politicians moving. Because of that, the crisis phase itself probably would last no more than 2 or 3 years. They would have to take action immediately to prevent the damage from spreading to other areas of the economy. So let's narrow down the Social Security is going broke story to the most likely outcomes. A full-blown collapse of the system is unlikely and probably can't be prepared for anyway, so let's not even go there. But some sort of cut in benefits or an intentional inflation, yes, those are distinct possibilities, and those are what we need to prepare for. Even if those happen, I suspect the benefit reduction will be something considerably less than the 23% projected. The 23% meaning they're only going to pay out 77% of benefits. That would imply a 23% reduction. I think it'll be more like on the order of 10% or 15%, and even that may be phased in over several years. So it won't be like a sudden collapse in benefits situation. As far as an inflation solution, not to minimize it, we've been dealing with that all of our lives, and we'll continue to adjust as necessary. Maybe we'll need to go a little bit farther with that should a deep inflation take place. We went through that in the 70s, we went through it in the early 20s. Those are the outcomes we can and maybe should prepare for. It's hard to prepare for a scenario that's short on specifics, but flexibility and adaptability will be critical, and that's true throughout life. Overall, plan to lower cash flow needs at retirement, lower than what retirees are now expecting. That's reasonable. Like I said, expect a benefit reduction of something on the order of 10 to 15%. Alternatively, expect inflation to ratchet above 5% for as many years as it takes the politicians to come up with a workable combination of tax cuts and benefits, if that's the route they choose. But inflation's not new, and there are ways to deal with it. So, not to leave you in a lurch, here are 7 steps we can take now in preparation for either scenario, a printing of money and inflation or a reduction in benefits. Number 1, plan on a part-time career or business for as long as you're healthy enough to work. If you can work for the first few years of retirement, that's going to make it easier later on. You can continue to save and accumulate money for when you can't work. Number 2, practice living beneath your means well before retirement, and certainly you could do that in retirement as well. Number 3, get out of debt and learn to live without it. Debt's going to be a killer in a reduced income situation. Number 4, continue to save and invest more money than you ever imagined you could, even in retirement. I think that's true at any time, but if you think the storm clouds are gathering, you're going to want to do that even more. Number 5, invest for growth. It may be the best defense against an inflationary future. You'll have to consider the options there, growth stocks, real estate. There are a lot of options there. Do your own studying, but you're going to have to invest for growth. You're not going to be able to put your money into a safe CD and say, I'm going to be fine. You won't. Not if inflation kicks in. And number 6, take particular care of your health. Facing any crisis will be far easier if you're in good health. And finally, number 7, scale back expectations for retirement. Plan on being happy even if you won't own a vacation home or you won't be taking frequent trips to the tropics. Since it appears we have a solid 7 years to prepare for a Social Security funding crisis, it may be possible to implement needed personal changes gradually. And that's far from a hopeless situation. What do you think? Will Social Security be here when you retire and beyond, or you think it's going to go bust? Leave your comments below and let's chat about it. And as always, I might turn your comment into a future video. If you like the video you're watching, hit the like button below and subscribe to the channel. And thank you for watching.